He sent her an invitation just to humiliate her. But when she walked into the party dressed like a queen, the crowd fell silent, and he never recovered. It started like a dare, the kind you whisper with a smirk over expensive bourbon in a private office, thinking no one else will ever hear it again. Richard Callahan was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his real estate firm's 32nd floor office in Stamford, Connecticut. Rain tapped lightly against the glass as he glanced down at the streets he rarely walked anymore. Behind him, 3 of his closest business buddies lounged on leather chairs, laughing, drinking, waiting for the caterer to bring up samples for Richard's upcoming birthday bash in the Hamptons. Okay, hear me out, Richard said, turning from the window. What if I invited Denise? You know, the cleaning lady with the big earrings. Just imagine her face when she gets a gold-embossed invite to a Hamptons black tie event. Laughter erupted. Michael Cray, his longtime golf buddy, nearly spilled his scotch. Dude, stop! She'd probably show up with a mop and bucket. Richard grinned, pleased with the reaction. It'll be our little inside joke. I'll even have the valet ready with a rag and some Windex. It was cruel. But in their world, cruelty was often masked as banter. And Denise Walton, the quiet black woman who swept their offices every other evening around 7 p.m., was invisible to them. Someone whose name they barely remembered unless there was a coffee spill or a dusty baseboard. But Denise? She remembered everything. That Tuesday night, as she emptied the trash in the break room, Denise heard her name. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She never did. But the door had been left slightly open, and her ears caught the sound of her name being used like a punchline. She's not gonna come, one of them said. People like that know their place. She stood still for a moment, holding the trash bag in her gloved hand. No anger, no flinch, just stillness. A long, heavy pause. The next morning, Richard had an embossed envelope dropped off at the cleaning supply closet. It was real enough to pass for sincerity. A white card with gold script that read, "You are cordially invited to celebrate the 62nd birthday of Richard Callahan at his summer estate in Bridgehampton. Black tie attire required. Saturday, 7 p.m. There was no RSVP number, no expectation, just the illusion of kindness. Denise looked at the card for a while that evening. She didn't cry. She didn't laugh either. She folded it carefully, placed it inside her handbag, and went back to buffing the floors. Because what they didn't know was this. Denise Walton wasn't new to disrespect. She had been in rooms where she wasn't welcomed, raised 3 children on 2 jobs, buried a husband, paid off her house, survived breast cancer without ever missing a week of work. A fake invitation wasn't going to undo her. But it did give her an idea. A quiet one. A graceful one. She took the next day off, told her supervisor she needed personal time, went to the beauty salon in Bridgeport, where she hadn't been in over a year, made an appointment to get her hair pressed and styled, found a second-hand boutique that sold gowns once worn by women who graced real galas. She picked a navy blue dress with a draped neckline. Classic, simple, clean. There was nothing flashy about it, except the quiet power it gave her when she put it on. But that quiet power was about to meet a room full of people who thought they already knew the end of her story. By Friday afternoon, the final guest list was confirmed. 162 names, all of them carefully selected, most of them rich enough to never check a price tag in their lives. Former senators, art collectors, a few young influencers invited purely to make the party look relevant. Caterers were hired out of Montauk. There was a lighting crew. A florist brought in peonies by the truckload. The driveway had been re-gravelled. Everything had been curated for the evening to be a spectacle, a display of control, power, legacy. And somewhere in between the engraved champagne flutes and drone light show prep, Richard's assistant Kyle had quietly chuckled while logging the funny invite into the database. "Wait, Denise Walton? The cleaner?" he said, squinting at the name as he entered it onto the digital list. "Yeah," Richard called out from behind his desk, not even bothering to look up. "Make sure her name's at the bottom. No +1. Let's see if she actually thinks she belongs." Kyle smirked, but his fingers paused for a second. Then he pressed save and moved on. The joke became a kind of inside currency, one they could all trade around, behind champagne smiles and cufflink compliments. That Saturday morning, at the beach house where Richard and his guests were getting ready, Denise's name came up again, this time as a punchline to a mock red carpet scenario. "So, Richard," laughed a woman named Reagan with a voice like sandpaper and money, "is your cleaning crew doing walkthroughs now? I mean, what if she actually shows up? You'll have to offer her turn-down service." Even the caterer caught wind of it, overhearing bits and pieces while unloading trays. His name was Hector, and he'd been working events like this for 12 years. He knew better than to say anything, but the disgust in his eyes didn't hide well. Most people at the party wouldn't know Denise if they saw her, but Richard's inner circle? They were waiting, just in case. Waiting for the absurdity of a woman like her showing up to their world. It wasn't about her as a person, it was about her presence being a disruption, a break in the image they spent years polishing. But not everyone laughed. Kyle's girlfriend, Brenna, a law school student from Yonkers, overheard part of the conversation on the drive to the estate. "So this Denise woman," she said casually, "you all invited her just to mess with her?" Richard waved his hand. "It's just for fun. Harmless. It's not like she's actually coming. She works for you." "She cleans," Richard corrected. "She doesn't work for me. She works in the building. There's a difference." Brenna didn't press it, but she made a note. The kind of silent inventory some people keep when they realize the people around them aren't who they pretend to be in public. By late afternoon, the estate was glowing in preparation. Waiters in black uniforms moved like clockwork. Cars were already pulling into the long, circular driveway. Photographers hovered near the entrance, snapping shots of arriving guests in gowns and tuxedos. Denise hadn't arrived yet, but the energy was already turning meaner by the hour. One man whispered to his wife, "If she shows up, I bet she doesn't even know how to use the right fork." His wife laughed. "She might think the wine glasses are for decoration." The sad thing was, they really believed that. In a room full of art degrees and couture, they had convinced themselves that humility meant ignorance, that someone who cleaned must be incapable of class. What they didn't expect was that someone like Denise could hold herself in a room they didn't think she could enter, without flinching, without stumbling, without begging for space. Because while they were trading insults wrapped in hors d'oeuvres, Denise Walton was standing in front of a mirror across town, adjusting the sleeves of her gown and pinning a small silver brooch near her collarbone. She didn't need to practice her walk. Her mother had taught her years ago, "You walk like you've already been where you're going." But no one at that party was ready for her to walk through those doors like she belonged there more than any of them. Denise Walton had always known how to read a room. You don't grow up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, the oldest of 5 kids with a sick mother and a part-time father, without learning to scan people's faces before they open their mouths. She didn't need to hear the full sentence in Richard's office that night. She understood the game the moment she saw her name on that invitation. It was meant to make her feel small. But Denise wasn't built like that. She wasn't a woman you could shrink with a laugh. When she got home that night, she laid the invitation on her kitchen table next to a chipped teacup and a stack of utility bills. Her small one-story home was quiet. Her kids were grown now, scattered across the country, busy with lives she'd helped build. The television buzzed softly in the background with a rerun of Family Feud, but she didn't really hear it. She just stared at the gold script on that heavy cardstock and thought, "They think I won't come. Not because I can't, but because they think I shouldn't." She thought about her late husband, Terence. He used to tell her, "People confuse wealth with worth. Don't ever let them hand you their rules and expect you to live by them." She still heard his voice sometimes when the house was too still. The next morning, Denise opened her closet. There wasn't much in there besides work uniforms and some church dresses she hadn't worn in a year. She stood still for a moment, then picked up her phone and called Ms. Rena, the woman who'd done her hair since the early 90s. "Baby," Rena said when she heard the request. "You going somewhere?" "Yes, ma'am," Denise replied. "I've got a party to attend." She could feel Rena smile through the phone. Later that day, Denise took a city bus to an upscale consignment shop in Fairfield. She browsed in silence. No assistant rushed to help her. No one asked what she was looking for. But she moved slow, deliberate, her eyes scanning fabrics the way someone else might scan paintings. And there it was, a navy silk gown with long sleeves and a neckline that dipped just low enough to be elegant without being loud. Clean lines, no sequins, no lace, just dignity. The saleswoman gave her a side glance when she asked to try it on. Denise didn't take it personally. She'd seen that look before. It was older than both of them. She tried the dress on, turned in front of the mirror, and smiled quietly. Not because it made her feel different, but because it matched the woman she already was. At the counter, the saleswoman asked, "Is it for a special occasion?" Denise looked her in the eye. You could say that. On Saturday evening, just before 6:30 p.m., Denise stepped out of a rideshare car in front of the Callahan estate. She hadn't told anyone she was coming. Not her supervisor, not her kids, not Rena. The driver offered to open the door for her. She gently declined. The estate was massive. Columns, imported stone, valet boys scrambling under fairy lights. A violinist was playing something classical near the hedges. People milled about holding glasses of champagne, laughing, checking over their shoulders to see who was arriving. Denise held her clutch in one hand and walked up the gravel path without hesitation. Her heels didn't wobble, her posture didn't falter. Every step was deliberate. The first person who saw her was a hostess. She glanced at the guest list, looked up at Denise, then back at the list again. "Name? Denise Walton," she said calmly. There was a pause, a long one. Then the hostess cleared her throat. "Of course. Right this way." People turned. Heads tilted. Conversations broke. No one said anything right away, but the air changed. The silence wasn't awkward. It was startled. Like someone had just heard thunder on a cloudless day. Richard hadn't seen her yet, but in less than 2 minutes, the man who had made her a joke was about to come face to face with the part of Denise he had never bothered to see. Denise stepped inside like she'd been there 100 times before. The foyer was massive, marble floors that reflected the chandelier light above, a curved staircase framed by 2 hired violinists playing something slow and expensive. She took her time, let her eyes adjust, let the weight of the room hit her. A woman near the entrance, wearing a gold gown that looked like it came with its own security detail, whispered to her partner. "Is she with the staff?" Her partner squinted. "I don't think so. She just walked in through the front." Denise caught pieces of it. Not all, but enough. She didn't smile. She didn't scowl. She just kept walking. The kind of walk that comes from years of being stared at in grocery lines, banks, interviews. Everywhere someone expected less from her. A young waiter with nervous eyes walked toward her, holding a silver tray. "Champagne, ma'am?" She took one, thanked him, and gave him the kind of smile that calms a shaking hand. "You're doing fine, baby," she whispered. He nodded once, surprised before disappearing into the crowd. At the far end of the room, near the bar, Richard Callahan was laughing. Loud, red in the face, surrounded by people who always laughed a little too quickly when he spoke. He didn't see her at first, but others had started to notice. Someone pointed. A few turned. A few more stopped talking mid-sentence. By the time Richard turned around, half the room was watching her. He saw the gown first, then the posture, then the face. For half a second, his expression cracked, just long enough to expose the panic behind the smirk. She wasn't supposed to come, and she sure as hell wasn't supposed to look like that. He slapped a grin on, walked over, arms open like they were old friends. "Denise! Wow! Look at you!" She held her ground. "Mr. Callahan, come on, we're at a party. Call me Richard." His voice was too loud, too forced. It was the kind of voice people used when they were trying to steer the room back in their favor. "You look great," he added, scanning her dress, still trying to piece together how this was happening. "Thank you. I figured since you invited me, I should show up." Simple. No sarcasm, no bite. Just truth with a straight back. He hesitated. "Of course. You're welcome here." He motioned around. "Everyone's welcome tonight. All about celebrating life, right?" Behind him, some of the guests were whispering. A few of the younger ones pulled out phones, pretending to check texts but really just trying to Google her name. Denise didn't flinch. She sipped her champagne and turned to look around. "You have a lovely home." "Thank you," Richard said quickly. "You want to meet some people?" She raised an eyebrow slightly. "Sure." He started introducing her to a few people. Faces she'd only seen on magazine covers or in framed photos while cleaning boardrooms. But now they were shaking her hand, asking where she got her dress, some out of politeness, others out of honest curiosity. One woman, slightly older, in a deep red dress, leaned in and asked, "Are you an artist?" Denise smiled. "No, ma'am. I clean offices downtown." There it was. The hush, the blink, the recalibration. "Oh," the woman said, caught off guard. "Well, you wear that dress better than half the people here." Denise chuckled. "I didn't come to compete, just came because I was invited." Another pause. Then the woman laughed. Not fake, not forced, real. "Well, I'm glad you did." The conversation started to shift, not all at once, but little by little. The questions weren't about why she came anymore. They were about who she was. And Denise? She answered the same way she lived, soft but firm, honest, and without apology. But Richard was still watching from the corner, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't the one controlling the room. Richard wasn't used to feeling irrelevant at his own parties. He stood by the grand piano, watching Denise like a man trying to figure out how the magician pulled off a trick in front of his eyes. His drink sat untouched. The laughter around him felt far away. He smiled when people looked over, but it didn't reach his eyes. He had expected Denise to be uncomfortable, quiet, out of place, maybe even grateful to be let in. He hadn't expected her to move like she had nothing to prove. And now the conversations were circling her. A state senator's wife had pulled her aside to ask about the brooch on her dress. A tech investor from Seattle was nodding as she talked about raising kids in Bridgeport and working 2 jobs. Even the live jazz band had started playing something softer, as if the room had shifted, and it had. Richard turned to Kyle, who had been trying hard to stay invisible. "Did you know she was actually coming?" Kyle shrugged, eyes darting. "She RSVP'd. "You didn't think to tell me that." "You said it was a joke." Richard clenched his jaw but said nothing. Instead, he started walking. Not toward Denise, but toward the bartenders. He had a plan forming. "Bring out the caviar tower," he barked to one of the staff. "Now, I want more noise in this room. More flash." "Yes, sir." He grabbed a mic from the side of the band's setup and tapped it a few times. "Ladies and gentlemen, I just want to take a quick moment to thank you all for being here tonight." The room quieted. Glasses clinked, heads turned. Denise stood near the center, not trying to blend in but not seeking attention either. She simply looked at him, calm and unreadable. "This evening is about celebration," Richard continued, pacing slowly. "About friends, family, hard work, and surprises." Some polite laughter. A few eyes flicked toward Denise, already sensing what this was. "And sometimes," he added with a grin that didn't feel right, "we're reminded that life throws unexpected guests our way." There it was. The temperature in the room dipped, just slightly. "But that's what makes nights like this memorable, right?" Denise didn't blink, didn't frown. She simply sipped her drink and waited. "Anyway," Richard said, trying to steer the mood back. "Eat, drink, enjoy the jazz. The caviar is flowing." He handed the mic back, forced a few pats on the back as he walked away, and stopped just behind the bar, pretending to check something. A man near the fireplace turned to Denise and muttered under his breath, "Well, that was awkward." She looked at him. "Only if you think it was about me?" The man blinked, chuckled, and held out his hand. "Wesley Granger. Denise Walton. I'm guessing you weren't on the original A list." "I was on the list," she said. "That's what matters." Wesley raised his glass. "Damn right." The air began to shift again. One guest, Brenna, Kyle's girlfriend, walked over to Denise and asked if she could sit with her. Then another. And slowly, the crowd around Richard began thinning. He noticed. Of course he did. At one point, a younger woman from a fashion startup asked Denise if she'd ever considered writing a book. Denise laughed softly. About what? About being exactly who you are in a room full of people who never thought you'd walk in. Denise shook her head, smiling. You don't need a book for that. You just need a mirror. A ripple of laughter and admiration followed. This time, Denise didn't hide it. She smiled back. But Richard, now standing alone by the catering table, realized the room he had built to celebrate himself was now orbiting someone else entirely. By the time dessert trays made their rounds, Denise Walton wasn't just a guest anymore. She was the conversation. It wasn't loud or theatrical. It was subtle, the way real respect tends to be. People leaned in when she spoke. They remembered her name. Even the ones who had raised their eyebrows earlier were now nodding along to her words. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She talked the way she always had. Clear, thoughtful, unbothered by the social dance happening around her. At one point, she found herself seated at a long table with 6 other guests, 2 venture capitalists, an art dealer, a retired news anchor, and an older couple from Greenwich who owned half the buildings on their block. None of them had expected to spend the night listening to a woman in a second-hand gown talk about life, but that's exactly what they were doing. So, you raised 3 children? The news anchor asked. Yes, Denise said, folding her napkin on her lap. 3. All grown now. My oldest is a teacher in Hartford, my middle one's in Tulsa, works in logistics, and the youngest just started their own landscaping business down in Tallahassee. You must be proud, the woman said. I am, Denise nodded. Not because they make money, but because they care about people. That's what I taught them. Doesn't matter how much you got if you don't know how to treat folks. The table fell quiet for a moment. Across from her, the art dealer leaned in. Did you always know you'd raise them on your own? Denise looked at him, not sharply, but directly. No one ever knows that. You just do what needs doing. My husband passed when my youngest was 10. Heart failure. I was working night shifts at the time, cleaning banks and waiting tables on weekends. Sometimes we didn't have enough, but we never had nothing. There was no bitterness in her voice, just plain truth. And the cleaning job? The man asked carefully. You still? I do, she said. 3 nights a week. Office work. Keeps me busy. And it's honest. I've never been ashamed of it. She could feel the room tilting again, not because people were pitying her, but because they were adjusting their idea of what strength looked like. Near the end of the table, the retired news anchor looked down at her wine glass. We spend our whole lives pretending we're different, she said quietly. But I think we all want the same thing. Peace, Denise nodded. And maybe a little respect along the way. Someone laughed softly. Another guest nodded. A few feet away, Richard watched from a high-top table, swirling ice in an empty glass. He wasn't laughing anymore. He hadn't laughed in over an hour. Kyle leaned over to him. Do you want me to ask her to keep it low-key? Richard looked at him, annoyed. Low-key? She's not doing anything. She's kind of becoming the story. I am the story, Richard snapped under his breath. Not tonight, Kyle said. Then he walked off. Richard looked down at his phone. Nothing new, no messages, no distractions, just the growing reality that he had planned a party to celebrate himself, and now the most talked-about guest was the woman he had invited as a joke. Meanwhile, Denise stood up and excused herself from the table. She made her way toward the back veranda where the night air was cooler and the chatter softer. She wasn't tired, but she liked space. Always had. Out on the patio, a young woman with braids and a velvet clutch joined her. She had been quiet all evening, hanging back, unsure of how to step into conversations that felt too old, too wealthy, too closed off. I just wanted to say, she began, that you made this place feel human tonight, Denise Bowen. And what's your name, baby? Callie, the girl replied. I came here as a +1. Thought I'd be invisible all night. You don't need permission to be seen, Denise said. Just keep showing up. Callie exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for an hour. Thank you. Denise looked out over the lawn, where fairy lights glowed faintly above the hedges. She didn't need the cameras or the compliments. The room had seen her. That was enough. But there was still one moment left in the evening, and it would come with a question no one saw coming. Back inside, the party was beginning to settle. The music had softened, the servers were clearing away empty glasses, and small circles of conversation dotted the vast hall like candle flames in the dark. Denise re-entered the room just as someone called for a toast. Richard's college friend, Douglas Whitner, a hedge fund executive with an inherited vineyard and a smirk that never left his face, raised his glass at the head table. "To Richard," Douglas said, "the man of the hour, the king of real estate, and the host of the year." A wave of applause rippled through the room. Richard grinned and clinked glasses with those closest to him. He was starting to feel a bit steadier again, back in control. Then Douglas glanced toward Denise, who had taken a seat beside Callie near the middle of the room. "And to our most unexpected guest tonight," Douglas said, lifting his glass again. "Miss, what's your name again?" The room tensed. Denise didn't flinch. "Denise Walton?" "Right, Denise Walton." Douglas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, cheers to you. I think I speak for a few of us when I say it takes guts to show up where you don't quite fit in." A few people chuckled, unsure whether to laugh or not. Richard's face dropped. It was the wrong kind of joke at the wrong time. Denise set her glass down slowly, turned toward Douglas. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't narrow her eyes. She simply spoke in the same calm, even tone she used when breaking up fights between her kids growing up. "Well, I appreciate the toast," she said, "but I didn't show up to fit in. I showed up because I was invited." The room went quiet. "Now, whether or not I fit, that's not really for you to decide, is it?" Someone near the back of the room said softly. Just that. A sound of agreement that hung in the silence like a bell. Denise kept going, but still without heat. "Just truth. People like you," she said, looking straight at Douglas, "like to think you're gatekeepers. That if you laugh at something, it's not cruel. It's just wit. That if someone like me walks in, it's a surprise instead of a choice. But see, I didn't sneak in. I walked through the front, announced, dressed right, minded my manners, and still, here we are." Douglas shifted in his seat, the smirk fading. "I've worked in rooms just like this for 25 years, she added. "Wiping windows, vacuuming carpets, scrubbing out stains you'll never notice because someone like me takes care of it before you even see it. And tonight, all I did was put on a dress and come through the front door. And somehow that's the part that's hard to swallow?" The silence was deep now. Not awkward, just real. Richard stood frozen. He knew this wasn't about a joke anymore. The room had shifted again, and this time, it wasn't going back. Denise sat back, picked up her glass, and ended with, "I came here out of respect. For the invitation. For myself. For the space. But make no mistake. I didn't come here for your approval. I've lived a full life without it." And that was it. No mic drop. No dramatic walkout. Just words that landed like bricks in a room made of glass. People stared. A few blinked hard. Some looked down at their drinks, unsure what to say. Then Callie clapped. Once, twice, then more. And then others joined in. Not the performative kind of applause. The slow, steady kind. The kind that says, "We heard you." Douglas sank into his chair. Richard sat with his hands folded. Suddenly a man at his own party who couldn't reclaim the stage. Denise didn't stand or bow or react. She just smiled softly and continued sipping her champagne. But after that moment, the party wasn't the same. Because now, everyone there knew exactly who the most important person in the room really was. After Denise spoke, the party didn't erupt back into laughter the way it normally would. It softened, shifted. The kind of shift you feel more than see. No one danced. No one called for another toast. Even the band seemed to ease into quieter rhythms, like they too understood the mood had changed. People began walking over to her, not in a rush, not with fanfare, but with something closer to sincerity. A grey-haired man with tortoise-shell glasses offered his hand and said, "Ma'am, I've never been checked so gently in all my life." His wife stood beside him, nodding. Denise shook his hand. It wasn't about checking anyone. Just telling the truth, he nodded. That's what made it land. A younger woman, maybe mid-20s, approached next. She wore a sleek green dress and nervously held a wine glass with both hands. Hi, I just wanted to say that what you said really, it meant something. Denise spioned gently. You've been quiet all night. I didn't know how to fit in either, the girl said. But after hearing you, I feel like maybe it's not about fitting in at all. Denise tilted her head. Baby, the day you stop shrinking to make others comfortable is the day you start living on your terms. The girl's eyes watered. She mouthed a quiet, "Thank you," and walked away with a look that said she'd remember this night for years. At the same time, near the patio doors, Brenna was whispering to Kyle, her voice low but sharp. You all humiliated her, and she still showed more grace than anyone here. Kyle didn't argue. He just stood still, staring toward Denise across the room. She walked in like she knew she belonged. That's power, Brenna added, before stepping away and disappearing into the crowd. Richard stayed seated near the back wall, watching it all play out like a movie he wasn't part of anymore. Every time he opened his mouth, he couldn't find the right words. He wanted to defend himself. Say it wasn't that serious. Say the invitation was a misunderstanding. But even he didn't believe that. And worse, everyone else had stopped pretending to. For years, Richard had measured his value in assets and applause. But tonight, applause belonged to someone else. And she hadn't asked for it. He tried to stand once, maybe to make a final speech or reassert control, but his feet didn't move. Instead, he sat back down and adjusted his cufflinks. Elsewhere, Denise had stepped outside again, this time with a few others trailing behind. A circle of people now sat with her under the outdoor heaters, people from different backgrounds, different ages, just talking. Nothing fancy, just honesty. Someone asked her, "So when you're not working or raising kids, what do you do for you?" Denise paused. "I garden. I read. I cook for people who actually eat the food without complaining." That got a few laughs. "I like to learn things," she added. "Always felt like if I stopped learning, I'd stop growing." A man beside her said, "Ever think about doing talks? Like, to groups? Schools even. What you said earlier, people need to hear that." Denise shook her head gently. "I'm not a speaker." "You are now," he replied. Inside, a few of Richard's close friends whispered about leaving early. Not because they had somewhere else to be, but because they felt uncomfortable in a way they couldn't admit. The kind of discomfort that comes when a mirror gets held up, and you don't like the reflection. By now, even the waitstaff had begun slowing their movements around Denise. Not out of awkwardness, but respect. One young woman, working her first event, quietly slid Denise a plate of chocolate-covered strawberries and whispered, "I wish my aunt could have seen you tonight." Denise touched her hand briefly. "Tell her she's still in the room. You're carrying her." The girl smiled, then darted away before tears gave her away. But even as the night grew quiet, there was one more moment to come, because goodbyes, when they're earned, carry more weight than any entrance. By the time the final dessert tray had been cleared and the last song wrapped up, only a few guests remained. The mansion, once buzzing with chatter and clinking glasses, now echoed with the soft footsteps of people gathering their coats and car keys. Denise stood near the edge of the veranda, her arms resting gently on the stone railing as she looked out into the darkness beyond the garden lights. The crisp air settled over her shoulders, but she didn't flinch. She was used to colder nights than this. Inside, Callie came up behind her, holding her coat. "I thought you might need this." Denise mellowed and slid her arms into the sleeves. "Thank you, sweetheart. You've been good company tonight." Callie beamed. "I learned more from you in 3 hours than I did in 4 years of school." "Well, school teaches you what's on paper. Life teaches you the rest." They shared a quiet moment. No one else was rushing them. No one was trying to move them along. From behind, Richard appeared at the door. He hesitated before stepping out. Alone now, no entourage in tow, just him and whatever apology he had been crafting for the last 2 hours. Denise heard the door creak, but didn't turn. She waited. He cleared his throat. "Denise." She turned slightly. "Richard," he let out a breath. wanted to say, I didn't expect you to come tonight. I know. He fumbled. Look, the invite. It was meant to be light-hearted. I wasn't trying to humiliate you. You did, though, she said. Maybe not in front of everyone, but when people like you laugh in rooms behind closed doors, thinking the rest of us won't hear it, that still counts. Richard looked down. I didn't come to shame you, Denise continued. I came because I was invited, and because I wanted to show you something. He looked up, hopeful. What's that? That you can't control how people see you, but you can control how you carry yourself. She stepped away from the railing. You invited me thinking I'd be the punchline. Instead, I reminded you what it looks like when someone walks through fire and still stands tall. He didn't argue. He couldn't. He just nodded slightly, lips pressed tight. Denise stepped past him. Callie followed, quiet and respectful. As they walked through the now near-empty hall, a few of the staff paused what they were doing and gave Denise small nods. One of the older servers even opened the door for her. Outside, her car was waiting. Not a limo, not a driver in uniform, just a regular black rideshare sedan with a polite man behind the wheel. She turned to Callie. You need a ride? Callie hesitated, then smiled. Only if I can sit in the front. They laughed. As the car pulled away, a few guests still lingering at the entrance watched them go. Some whispered, some waved. And inside the mansion, Richard walked back toward the now empty ballroom where his name had been printed on every card, every menu, every balloon. For the first time in years, the silence made him uncomfortable. Not because of its volume, but because of its clarity. He sat down alone at one of the long tables, looked at the empty chair Denise had filled just hours before, and for once he didn't try to pretend he was the most important person in the room, because even he knew. But not all lessons hit like thunder. Some arrive quietly, and they echo long after the music stops. Monday morning came like it always did. Grey sky, traffic humming, coffee pots brewing in office break rooms across Stamford. Denise Walton clocked in at 6:47 a.m., like she had every Monday for years. Same sneakers, same uniform, same building. But everything else felt different. The woman at the security desk looked up and smiled wider than usual. Morning, Miss Walton. Denise paused. Morning, Judy. Inside the elevator, two junior analysts, young, sharp-suited, and usually buried in their phones, both greeted her. One even held the door open. Good weekend? One of them asked. Denise looked straight ahead, smiled gently. You could say that. By the time she reached the 32nd floor, she'd already heard bits of it. She was at the party. Spoke right to Mr. Callahan. Didn't blink. People were clapping, I swear, clapping. Word had gotten around. Not through social media, not through gossip columns, but through whispers. Staff talk. Waiters who had gone home and told their cousins. Valets who told their sisters. Someone's nephew who had filmed just enough to send to a friend. In the maintenance room, Denise hung her coat, pulled on her gloves, picked up her mop. She didn't need a podium, or a title, or a nameplate on a door. She already knew who she was. Meanwhile, back in the executive office, Richard sat at his desk in a building that now felt a little colder than it used to. His inbox was full, meetings stacked. But he couldn't stop thinking about Saturday night. That moment. The way the room had turned toward Denise like she was the only voice worth hearing. It wasn't anger he felt now. It was something heavier. A dull, uncomfortable kind of regret. He had money. Properties. Staff who jumped when he cleared his throat. But he didn't have what Denise had. Respect. And respect, he realized too late, can't be bought or demanded. It can only be earned. Later that afternoon, he asked Kyle to call Denise to the office. She came in quietly. Uniform still on, no makeup. Just calm. Have a seat, he said, gesturing toward the leather chair. She didn't sit. I owe you an apology, he said. She nodded. Yes, you do. He looked up at her. I'm sorry. For everything. The invite. The way I minimized you. She tilted her head slightly. You didn't minimize me. You just showed me how small you still think. The silence stretched. He swallowed. Can I make it right? Denise looked at him for a moment, then said, Start by seeing the people who keep this place clean. Know their names. know what they carry when they go home. And maybe stop using power to make jokes about people who work harder than you do. He nodded slowly. He looked older than he had Saturday night. Denise turned to go. At the door, she paused. One more thing, she added, without turning back. Invite someone because you want them there, not because you want them to know they weren't supposed to be. Then she left. Not triumphant, not smug, just finished. And for the first time in his career, Richard Callahan didn't have the last word. That night, Denise made dinner for herself at home. Turnip greens, fried catfish, macaroni that baked a little too long on the edges. She poured herself a glass of iced tea and turned the radio low. The world hadn't changed, but her place in it had gotten a little louder, not because she fought for it with fists or force, but because she showed up, stood still, and made sure everyone saw her without having to raise her voice. Because dignity doesn't need permission, and grace doesn't wait for applause. If you felt something during this story, if it made you think of someone, or made you think differently, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. These aren't just stories, they're reminders of the kind of people we still need in the world.